So what's important, I think, is to not simply take the word of Martin Romualdez as it is. He's not self-made. There is no such thing as new money. There is only money from ill-gotten wealth that was invested, and any profits from ill-gotten wealth is itself ill-gotten.
Hi, thank you for coming on assignment with me, Natasha Gutierrez. On this podcast, I take you behind the scenes with me on investigations, interviews, and assignments. Every episode, we talk about a specific topic or go on assignment. Today, my assignment is to understand how ill-gotten wealth is acquired, how it's hidden from the government, and how it's recovered in a Philippine context. Make sure you subscribe on YouTube and wherever you get your podcasts, and follow me on social media at Natasha_G. And send me your tips and whatever notes you have on natashagutierrez.com. And if you're really feeling generous, buy me a coffee. So today we have a bonus episode wherein we continue our conversation with my previous guest, Ruben Carranza, an international lawyer who was involved in recovering ill-gotten wealth that was taken by the Marcoses and his friends and associates under his dictatorship. Now, today, Mr. Carranza will talk more about how ill-gotten wealth is acquired, how it's hidden from the government, and the challenges of recovering it. I am especially interested in this topic because of what's happening in the Philippines and the current flood control corruption scandal. So let's get started. I'd like to talk about what is being dubbed as the biggest corruption scandal in recent Philippine history. Obviously, the flood control corruption scandal. Now that this is happening and ongoing, can you share with us the challenges and difficulties of recovering ill-gotten wealth? How likely is it really for the Philippines to recover the billions of dollars that's been stolen from government coffers?
I follow some of what's going on, and one of the things I saw was they were auctioning luxury vehicles of some of these contractors, and people who might not know any better love the spectacle of seeing these luxury vehicles taken and then sold off. But I've seen this happen in different countries. I've seen this happen in the Philippines. The PCGG recovered some of these vehicles and aircraft, and didn't know what to do with them. Because even if you sold them, right, you would have to sell them at a price lower than what you would otherwise fetch. But these are also very performative steps. These are not. It's fine. Nobody can drive away that car in the middle of the night because it's in your government compound. But what about the foreign bank accounts? What about the property abroad? What about jewelry, paintings that you could easily just wrap in a box and ship out? There are now ways of freezing and tracing these types of assets that were not as robust when we were doing our work. I remember going after paintings that were acquired by Imelda Marcos and having to use something called the art registry. There's a private registry of artwork where people would want to verify the origins and the uh, succession of ownership in it. And now that is a more sophisticated and more reliable way of determining uh, ownership and title to art. The same thing with jewelry to some extent because of anti-money laundering legislation. With banks, you have improvements over know your customer rules and um, Paris Task Force on Anti-Money Laundering regulations that the Philippines has had to comply with. But at the same time, this is the catch. The same people who will adopt legislation, who will approve legislation to adopt these regulations, are the politicians who commit corruption.
So, in short, is it impossible to get all of
It's
that
not,
money back?
it's not impossible. For example, you have the Anti-Money Laundering Council in the Philippines. When I was in the commission, I asked them to freeze um, cash that was transferred to Imelda Marcos by the Tony Boy Cojuangco family, who at that point controlled PLDT because Imelda was, dropping her claim to PLDT in exchange for cash. the Anti-Money Laundering Council essentially ignored our letter signed by chairperson at that time, Heidi Yora. And I don't know whether they will do the same thing now, but you do have institutions like this that sometimes focus on anti-terrorism, on casinos, when there is a lot of, to be done already in relation to corruption. So it is possible. The same thing could this anti-money laundering council could in fact do something about Duterte assets. So Rodrigo Duterte is charged at the ICC at the International Criminal Court. The ICC actually has power to ask countries to freeze the assets of a person in detention. You don't have to wait for the ICC to ask you to do that, especially since the ICC is itself taking sanctions from the US. The Anti-Money Laundering Council can actually freeze Duterte assets in relation to the ICC case. So, in other words, the institutions exist. And perhaps if you have 10, 20, 100 people who actually took the job seriously, you could do something about it.
It sounds to me like it's almost easier to freeze or recover assets of the people who are in the lower rungs. So, for example, the contractors and being able to
Mhm,
just get their luxury vehicles. But because of the connections of those higher in power, there's so many more ways to almost hide
mhm.
their assets. What will it take for this government to show that they are serious about changing the system or about holding people accountable? What would the Marcos Jr. presidency need to do to appease the Filipino people?
What I've been saying since he first ran, I think, for vice president in 2016, if you're running for public office uh, and you're a Marcos, you have to come forward if you really want to redeem your family's name. You have to come forward and say, our family was involved in ill-gotten wealth and in corruption, and I'm going to return that wealth. And I'm going to make sure that my grandchildren and all my own children will not benefit from it. Nobody's stopping him from running for office. That's water under the bridge now. But today, tomorrow, he can come out and say, these are the assets that we want to return. Because I feel that I don't have the moral ascendancy to go after other Filipinos in government, outside of government. I don't have the moral ascendancy to say, you should be ashamed or there should be someone in prison. If your own mother, who has been convicted, is not in prison. So that's the first thing he has to do. Anything else he says that indicts others, that condemns other corrupt officials, or names other families as corrupt, um, that's hypocrisy.
So even if he were to allow plunder and graft charges to move forward against his own cousin, his first cousin, even if he eventually goes to jail, Martin Romualdez, until he returns the money or admits to having benefited from ill-gotten wealth of his father, you do not think that is enough.
It won't be enough, and and I don't think it will even happen in the first place. Because it's one thing to say, let the law take its course, let the ombudsman do this, let the courts do that. But when the ombudsman is your appointee and whose own family benefited from the Marcos dictatorship, when the judges are your own appointees or the Duterte appointees, and you're in this rivalry, in this contest for power with the Dutertes, um, all these actions will at the very least be suspect. That these are not meant for accountability. These are not meant for transparency. These are not meant to, uh, you know, recover ill-gotten wealth of those who are committing corruption today. But these are meant to cement your hold on power, to ensure that the Marcoses will themselves not be held accountable. So, um, of course, people will say what I'm saying is impossible, because why would the Marcos uh, come out and say, we were corrupt during the Marcos dictatorship and we want to change that now? But I've seen that happen. Right? I've seen that happen. I've seen not total. remorse, not absolute redemption, but at least acknowledgement that their fathers, their parents, were dictators who committed corruption. The former president of South Korea, who herself is now in prison, apologized for the human rights violations, corruption committed by her father, Park Chung-hee. The one of the children of Idi Amin came forward and said, "My father was corrupt. My father was brutal. I apologize for that." I've seen these families and these children acknowledge. Of course, I've also seen completely incorrigible, sons and daughters deny that their fathers were dictators and were corrupt. But it's a choice. Right? It's a choice. It's not destiny that you have to be the son of a corrupt dictator and yourself be corrupt. You can try to redeem yourself, and maybe it might be possible.
And how about the first part of that scenario? Do you believe that President Marcos Jr. would allow the imprisonment, if it came to that, of his first cousin?
No, uh, you know, the Romualdezes are as much part of the Marcos dynasty as the Marcoses themselves. Um, Even when the Marcos family is, well, this spectacle of siblings publicly insulting each other, um, these that isn't. I don't see that as bridge burning. There are ties that are far deeper and far stronger than what we see publicly, and these families will consolidate, um, circle their wagons around, what they want to keep, wealth and power. And so I don't I will not pin my hopes on the on redemption in the Philippines on families that appear to be just beyond redemption right now.
Martin Romualdez has maintained his innocence, and I want to quote his statement from September. I am self made. I do not need and will never allow myself to be corrupted by money that does not belong to me. He does have a lot of inheritance, a lot of business interests. How could one be able to determine the sources of his wealth if they are from newer schemes, if he already had assets to begin with, whether or not that was acquired in other ways? I think that, to me, at least when I try to think about, the challenges, because he's always said, I have my own money. These are all my business interests. So how can you actually be able to pinpoint that this is new money that has come from perhaps unscrupulous ways?
There's no such thing in their case. There is just no way that you get control of the bank because you're self-made in the case of Romualdez. The fact is that his father, using the dictatorship, um, simply took over a bank and made this this politician take control of the bank. So what's important, I think, is to not simply take the word of Martin Romualdez as it is. He's not self-made. There is no such thing as new money. There is only money from ill-gotten wealth that was invested, and any profits from ill-gotten wealth is itself ill-gotten.
What needs to be done for the Filipino people to, again, gain trust in their government officials?
Well, there are two things that I think we can learn from Chile as an example. Right? Chile is now headed by a socialist president. There's an election upcoming in Chile, but one of the things that the Chilean president did, even decades after the end of the Pinochet dictatorship, was to draft a constitution that would entrench uh, both rights of the most marginalized populations in a country that is very, very unequal. And then, equally important, to ensure that the institutions that were going after Pinochet would have the power to continue going after Pinochet. So I'm arguing that a constitution that would now have to bring lessons from what happened after the Marcos dictatorship ended and the new constitution came after that would have to be drafted. The second thing would be more self protection. If Filipino politicians don't want the uprisings that have been happening, led by Gen Z generations, youngest generations, high school students, those barely in college who are frustrated by the inequality that they see, then I think it's important for them to um, ensure that institutions really are independent of the dynasty. Uh, in the Philippines, they're trying to pass an anti-dynasty law because the constitution mandates that. But no matter how you try, dynasties will not legislate against themselves. So what you want to do is to build the institutions that could ensure that while you still can't control dynasties from reproducing and also reproducing corruption, that these institutions gain strength, strength to strength, the same way that the institutions in Singapore and Hong Kong gain strength over time to finally be able to confront, uh, the same types of politicians that have always been corrupt in those countries.
Well, hopefully that change does come for the Philippines.